join us. So we're going to jump right into our topic. Today it will be focused on Oregon Buys Phase 1 agenda topics and a general overview of where we are in the project from the DAS project team. We're going to talk about requisitions today, organizational structure, user roles, restrictions authority, and active contracts and ORS 190s. As I said, our guests today are the project team, and the team will share all this. We'll share information about those topics, and then we're going to open it up for folks to ask clarifying questions or anything that they might need to know about that particular subject matter. With the Phase 1 implementation only 5 weeks away, it's really important that through this discussion we keep a few things in mind as we work through the topics. One is questions and discussions. We're going to ask that they be focused on Phase 1 only right now. We realize there are probably decisions that we may want to have more conversation about, but I would ask that you keep track of those. You can also put them in the chat if it's more Phase 2, but there's something you want to know about Phase 1 that you think will impact Phase 2, and we're going to pass those questions on to DAS so that they can actually try to address those in the core team or maybe through a FAQ. Today we have Kayla Van Hoos, who will be helping to facilitate the conversation. And if we're getting into topics on Phase 2, she'll probably graciously interrupt and say, hey, that's more of a Phase 2 question. Could we put that on the in the chat box? We really want to focus on the things that are going to directly impact the implementation of Phase 1. Please, please, please do your best to commit to learning and getting clarification as you need through this discussion. And while we don't want to limit questions or discussions, we do need to keep in mind that this is a large council, and we want to make sure that others have the opportunity to participate. So if you're a particular agency and you have a long list of questions, I'd ask you to sort through them while we're on the call, focus on the Phase 1, and certainly you can add the other ones in the chat, or you can email them to Mary Mines, and we'll get them off to DAS. Finally, I ask that we listen actively and try to avoid comments or feedback that may not be positive in nature, because I know change is hard and the system's right around the corner and there's a lot of folks that need a lot of information. And I know that Oregon Buys project team is committed to really helping us through this. So let's try to focus on this from how can we make this work and be successful for each other. The last 20 minutes, if we have any time, we'll open it up for just general questions. Again, that aren't necessarily related to the topics, and we may or may not have time to get to them. And I'll certainly be helping to monitor the chat, so will Kayla. So if things come up that folks don't feel comfortable asking out loud, we'll try to bring them forward in the discussions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kayla for a brief minute to just say a few words, and then we'll continue on with the agenda. The Oregon Buys team does have a presentation. They're going to kind of walk through that, and when we get to the specific topics, I'll probably stop them there and say we're now transitioning to one of the topics that's on the agenda. So with that, Kayla, I'm going to turn it over to you and have you say a few words about your role today.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me. I'm here to just help out and facilitate the questions that are coming through and really just help stay focused on Phase 1. Again, like Melissa said, if we're getting into Phase 2 questions, I will try and capture some of those to send on to the project team for later discussion, or let you know that we'll be discussing those later. If we do get through one of the topics on the agenda quicker than the time allotted, we'll move to the next topic, like Melissa had said, and then at whatever time we have left at the end, we can add that additional FAQ on things that are outside of those agenda items. And then, like I said, we'll send any questions we don't get answers to or don't have time to work through to the project team to then work through and figure out the best way to get them back to either this DPO council or in the individual core teams for the agencies. All right.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. Nicole, are you here?
I am here. Let me share my screen. Okay, can folks see the slide deck?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So thanks for having us today. We have quite a few members of our Oregon Buys project team here. We also have Corey Mabry, who is with Periscope Holdings, who's a vendor who provides the Oregon Buys system. So lots of folks here that can help answer questions, and we're happy to be here to talk with you today. I'm going to start by handing it over to Jenny. So Jenny, I will let you start with the project phases overview.
Great. And we won't spend a whole lot of time on these because we did meet with Jan and Melissa and know that there were some very specific areas that this group wanted to spend most of the time, but we felt like it was important with you as a group that we do share a couple of information pieces. And next slide, Nicole, please. So we are speaking about phase one. But this particular slide, well, there's two slides here. And just a reminder that phase one replaces ORPN and has marketplace searching capabilities. Phase two then is broken down into 3 waves. They're identical. However, a lot of the to-be process design work that will affect all of the waves will begin very, very soon after go live and of ORPN replacement, go live phase one, and we'll move through August, September that in phase two. So just a little bit, just want to keep these timelines and kind of what's broken down into those. I think the next slide though is the most beneficial, and you all always get a copy of the deck. And this is the what is in scope in these different categories. And so it's color coded with phase one functionality, and under vendor access, there are 6 boxes. Actually, there are 5 boxes that are phase one. And then when we get to phase two, vendors will be able to accept orders and submit invoices. That clearly is phase two functionality. Sourcing, and I won't read each box here, but this hopefully will be a good resource document for you when you start thinking about how things should work. If you hear something that doesn't seem right, you can go back to this, and if it still doesn't seem right, by all means let us know. We know sometimes we get tripped up on understanding things and might say something inaccurate, so we always want to straighten those out, but hopefully this is a helpful document. Moving on, just a reminder on blackout guidance, and we had shared the transition guidance document, but we're getting some questions, and this is more pointed to that 2-week period when there's not an active system to actually post a document. Procurement still goes on, business still carries on, but posting documents is what will be missing. You can still do your internal processes related to requisitions. Small procurements can be done. If they're personal service, you just upload them when we go into Oregon Buys. Prep work for new solicitations can be done in Oregon Buys in that window. You just won't have it posting until July 1. Of course, emergencies can be done. You can submit any special requests to DAS-PS outside of the system if it's urgent. Evaluations can continue. It's just outside of the system. And amendments can be done if you've got to get work done and then just posted later. And of course, spots cards can be used for your purchasing because that's outside of the system. So this is just in a little bit different format that may be a little bit easier for you to share with your teams. And with that, Nicole will talk about the impact of vendors.
So I just wanted to briefly circle back because this was something we had talked about in a former DPO meeting, and I had said that that we were looking into what the vendor access would look like during the blackout and afterwards into the vendor access into ORPN. So I just wanted to circle back and let folks know. So starting June 16th, the state will no longer post or edit documents in ORPN. Everyone is well aware of that. the 16th to the 30th of June, state solicitations won't be posted in ORPN or in Oregon Buys. And then the gray box really talks about vendors. So vendors may continue to log in or to register in ORPN after June 16th, and that gives them access to existing read-only documents. Vendors are asked to register in Oregon Buys for preparation of the July 1st go live. Those vendor accounts do not automatically transfer over. And we have been sending out direct push messages to vendors through the ORPN system using a broadcast tool. So that allows us to push out emails to the registered vendors to notify them of these changes. And then we're also updating the ORPN landing page and welcome pages. So I just wanted to circle back on that piece because that was something we had committed to come back to folks on.
Thank you, Nicole. One last bullet before we get into the topics, and that is on electronic bid response requirement. And electronic bid response is a really important component of what we're investing in. And the expectation is that electronic response is always an option, is always a selected option when a solicitation is done. We really want to encourage that. If a proposer doesn't have the bandwidth to upload a proposal, then that single point of contact, whoever's running that solicitation, is going to have to work with that particular vendor. And hopefully over time, if they're able to get registered, which you've got to have internet to get registered, hopefully that those will continue to grow and be able to do more electronically. The electronic signature is not built into the system. However, vendors can upload documents. So they can sign and upload, we can sign and upload and share. The only electronic signature is in a module that's actually outside of the base system, the contract lifecycle management. So it will still be printing and putting a name, or if a vendor uses an electronic signature and they're comfortable with that, then they can do that and upload the document. So those are a couple of areas, things that have been, we wanted them all in one place, and ask that you share with all of your staff. And certainly if there are any questions in the chat, I'll keep an eye once we move into the next section. So I think with that, it moves back to Kayla or Melissa.
All right, well, we're going to first talk about requisitions. We don't know if this will take up the whole time, but we were going to have the Oregon Buys team give a little overview about requisitions, and then we would open it up to you folks to talk about requisitions, clarifications you might need, you know, rumors that you might be hearing, things that you might be interested in. We really wanted to give you the opportunity to just ask those questions now. And you can certainly use the chat feature, and Kayla and I will be monitoring it if you don't feel comfortable talking out loud. But we definitely want to make sure you're given the opportunity to ask these questions, get clarification, and anything you need to know. So please use the chat feature or raise your hand and we will certainly acknowledge you. So with that, I'm going to have you folks from Oregon Buys team go ahead and just give a brief overview of requisitions, and then we'll open it up to the floor for the members to have a discussion about it.
Great, thank you, Melissa. So they're pretty straightforward for phase one. So requisitions in phase one are limited to the following, and it's really sending requests to DAS for on behalf of type things. So purchase requests, client initiated amendment requests, special procurement requests, sole source requests, delegation requests, or other special requests. All of those would be done as a requisition to send that from the agency to the DAS on behalf of organization, or DAS OBO. Internal agency requisitions will continue to use your current existing processes outside of Oregon Buys until phase two. So in phase two, all of those current processes that the agencies are doing for their internal requisitions, those will come on board. But for phase one, we're really just limited to sending requests from agencies to the DAS on behalf of org. And with that, I will pause and see if we have any questions. Melissa, I think you're muted.
Well, I like talking to, there you go, I'm talking to myself. I was gonna say, let's go ahead and open it up and let's ask the questions that you have about requisitions within the system. Anything that, you know, you're finding that you would like to get clarification on. And then I also have a couple questions, but I will save mine till the last part. So let's go ahead and open it up. I know folks have questions potentially about this. And we have a hand up. Getting to that screen, hold on just a second. Kayla, can you monitor this? It's Sharon.
Yep, Sharon. Yep, Sharon, go ahead.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thanks, Nicole, and everybody for putting this together. So just maybe as a refresher and a reminder to everybody, because the language is different and Oregon buys than it is in how we do business today, maybe could you just explain what a requisition is? I know that you've got this list here, and a purchase request, is that like literally a purchase request that, you know, what do you mean by that? Maybe define that a little bit.
Sure. Corey, could you speak to that just from a system functionality perspective?
Sure. So, hi, this is Corey Mabry from Periscope. When we're talking about a requisition in the system, it really is a request. So it might be, hi, I'm Corey. I need a new office chair. And maybe I don't have the authority to, you know, purchase that on my own. So I'm going to submit a request for an office chair. Maybe it's something that's, you know, brand new and I want to procure a new procurement management system. So I'm going to put in that request. So it's really kind of the start of a process for either purchasing or sourcing goods or services in the system. Oftentimes a request comes from someone outside of the procurement specialist, perhaps. It might be somebody who has a lower authority in the system, and that is a mechanism for them to put in the information that they have for their request and be able to submit it to folks who then can make the determination about whether it's something that we have on contract that we can purchase from, whether it needs to go out for, you know, a more formal type of bid solicitation, all of those kinds of things. So really, when you hear the word requisition, it's really just a request. It's the beginning of that process. Now, some of what I talked about is more, like we said, phase 2, because what we're using the request for in phase 1 are limited to just these things that Nicole has on the screen. So these are requests, but in phase 1, it's a very limited scope.
Taylor, I think we have a question in the chat, a couple of questions.
Let me unmute myself. The first one is, can only basic purchasers submit these requests to DAS?
That is really, I think, a question maybe for Nicole.
So it's more about who the agencies decide to set up with the ability to send requests to DAS. So it would not necessarily need to be all of your procurement folks. It may just be a handful of users for each agency that are set up with the, it'll be a second organization relationship to the DAS on behalf of orgs. So when a user at an agency needs to send something to DAS, one of these types of requests, they will actually navigate to the DAS OBO, DAS on behalf of organization by changing the organization that shows in the lower right of their screen. They'll move into that organization and submit the requisition, and that's how it gets sent to DAS. So it's really just going to be the folks that the agency has determined that they want to be set up with that permission to send those requests to DAS for the agency. An agency may choose to only set up maybe a DPO and a few others. They may want to set up a few more folks in that, but from a functional perspective, the system could allow BP or DA users to send those requests to DAS.
Thank you, Nicole. And I'm going to follow up on a question since you kind of touched on it, and it was a little bit about that. So when you talk about the functionality and how someone does a request to DAS, as far as the training goes, because that training is not covered in the in-person or team Zoom session, is it covered in the modules that are online? And is it specific instructions, like you just said, changing the org that you're into the other org and whatnot?
So it is not covered in the facilitated session. That is true. There is a video training that covers how to create a requisition in the system. It does not include some of the guidance that we'll have around the DAS OBO sorts of elements there that Nicole talked about, but we'll be putting together a guidance document that we'll be able to share with you. Erin Ward is working through just confirming a few steps of that process to make sure that they're in line with how we want that to function. And when we have that validated, we'll be creating that document and we'll be able to share it out with you. There is that training though, which is just the system functionality of how to create a requisition, and that is available now.
Great. That's the last part is what I was hoping to hear, that there would be some direction on that if it wasn't included in the training. Okay, so the next question would be, wouldn't someone putting in the request information and submitting it for someone to determine the sourcing method then be considered an internal requisition process?
I don't think I understand that. Can you read it again for me, Kayla?
Yeah, or Shannon, do you want to maybe clarify your
Sure.
question?
Sure. So my question, you were talking, Corey, about how, somebody could put in a requisition and you could limit what they could do, and then they put in the information and send it to someone else for approval. So in my mind, it seems like, isn't that really the same functionality as an internal requisition? And to add to this, I think the hard part for me, and the more I think about it, I believe the training comes at it from I guess I would call decentralized point of view, in that anyone who can do these things, this is how you do them. And after watching the trainings, there's several of them that really I had to explain to people, like the shopping to ordering. You can watch that, but you can't do that functionality. So I think we're thinking about it in the way the training is being provided, but what we really need to be doing is thinking about it from the centralized, and how do you tell the people in the field what authorities they have? So it's almost reversed. Does that make sense?
Sure. So the full explanation of what a requisition is, which is what I did earlier, that does include, those internal requisition processes that will be future state. But a requisition is just making a request. So in this case, a requisition is making a request to DAS on behalf of. The training videos that you are watching are not videos that are specific to Oregon. We use those with other clients. We use those across PHI at this point. So there are trainings there that have information in a more general sense. So we rely upon, a recognition that there are some elements that are phase 1 and some that are phase 2. And so we'll continue to communicate those and provide guidance. So there is information in any of those training courses that might apply to phase 2. So when you look at the requisitions, that information will also apply to phase 2, but it does give you the information that we need for phase 1 on how to do it in the system. So remember that the system trainings are really about how the system works, and there will be guidance documents that support that with this is how we're using it in Oregon.
Melissa, go ahead.
So just as a point of clarification for me and maybe other folks. So the way tell me if I'm thinking about this correctly. So if I have an internal process where my business partners, for phase 1, where my business partners send me a requisition, that would probably continue however I'm doing it. I'm not necessarily going to be doing that in Oregon Bytes. However, once as the central office, gets the requisition from however I do it with my agency, I then turn to Oregon Bytes to submit the requisition if it needs to go to DAS in Oregon Bytes.
That would be correct.
Right.
Okay, so the expectation isn't, so it's really incumbent upon us to make sure that business partners, if we're a central organization, know that they continue to submit their request the same way they have. And we will work with DAS if it's subject to DAS authority in ODOT's case. We'll work with DAS through the Oregon Bytes system if it's that type of procurement. Okay. All right. That was my clarifying question. Kayla, if you want to go to the next one, there was Sharon had a,
Yep.
think a follow-up.
Sharon, do you want to just clarify on your 2 follow-up questions? It'd probably be easier if you just asked them if they didn't get answered.
Sure, yeah, and it's kind of a 2-parter. And I guess I was not clear on this until this moment, and maybe I'm not clear now at all, but so phase 1, we all knew was not going to include accounting or the purchasing, but my understanding was phase 1 was all about retiring orphan, standing up organ buys, and that would become our new posting tool where we post solicitations. If I'm reading and understanding what you're saying now, that phase 1, agencies will not post anything in there unless they're sending it to DAS.
Agencies
So
will
if that's
post.
the case, where will we post our solicitations until phase 2?
You will be posting bid solicitations in Oregon Buys as part of phase 1. This is just in addition to any agency postings you have. If you need to make a request to DAS OBO, DAS on behalf of, you do it in the system in this manner. But posting of bid solicitations is firmly part of the scope of phase 1.
Okay, I'm sorry. This just was a little misleading for me. I'm sorry. I think I understand now. So we will, as agencies, not just use Oregon Buys only to send requests to DAS to do on our behalf, but we will also use it to do our own posting in phase 1. Okay.
And this is Melissa again. So the way I envisioned it, if I was thinking about this as an agency, is I'll still use whatever requisition process I use in my agency for phase 1. When I want to solicit something or I need to post something, it's all going to be in Oregon Buys as opposed to Orphan than what we would normally do. The only difference in the use of the requisition in phase 1 is when we need to turn to DAS to do it on our behalf or to do one of these particular requests. That's how I'm understanding it. Is that correct?
You're correct, Melissa. That's absolutely right. So if you have right now where perhaps within an agency, there's a form that somebody out in the field fills out and sends to you, maybe via email, that's going to continue to come to the procurement folks. And then the procurement folks, if they need to solicit, would post a bid in Oregon Buys.
Okay, we don't have any additional questions in the chat for requisitions. Is there anything else anybody has about requisitions?
I had one, but I think I'm just going to take it offline.
All right.
Okay, we're going to move to the next slide. The next topic that we wanted to talk about, and we know this is probably going to take a little more time, is organizational structure, user roles, restrictions, and authority. And before I go, did anybody have any rumors that they're hearing about requisitions or things they need to clarify before we move off of that? Because I think it's important that we dispel rumors or things people are hearing or get clarification. So I want to put that out there. Is there anything that somebody wants to bring up that they're hearing, that they're concerned about, so we can at least capture it? If we can't necessarily answer it, but at least capture it. So is there anything you want to get clarification on at this point on requisitions? Okay, then we'll move on to the next topic, which is the organizational structure. And again, the Oregon Buys team has graciously put this together to just give us some context, and then we can have some more conversation into this next subject matter.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Okay, so as far as organization structure, so departments and locations, so the organization administrators, or OAs, have already provided this information in a template back on April 24th. So this work was finished. It's been uploaded into the test or the UAT environment. And as agencies are going in and performing their process validations, that will help to confirm that the agency hierarchy setup or the department and location setup is correct. And so the deadline for that process validation is June 3rd. And then just to keep in mind that changes to structure can be made at any time by the organization administrators. So if an agency starts working in the system and decides that they want to maybe tweak the way that their departments and locations are set up, the OA can certainly do that at any time. The other piece that we wanted to mention on user roles is, again, your OA can change or update user roles at any time. So if you've assigned like a basic purchaser role to a user and then determined down the road that they don't really need a BP role, maybe they could be set up as a department access user instead. Changing the roles is a very simple action for the OA to do. It's really just marking a checkbox and saving the selection. So that's another one that at any point in time, as you kind of are working in the system and maybe change your mind on what a user needs, or maybe their position has changed within the organization, that's a very simple action to do within the system. I have one more slide here on this. So as far as the OA management of the hierarchy and the users, once the initial setup is complete, the management really for the OA is really reduced to user changes. So new users, exiting users, or maybe changing roles within the system. So as far as a time commitment for the OAs, the time commitment really just depends on the agency size and complexity. But then they should also be establishing a process for tracking the user changes so that they have that historical information. The other piece here on approval paths, we just wanted to let folks know that approval paths is set to be discussed more in detail at the next set of core team sessions. But approval paths can also be added by an OA at any time ongoing, or updated and maintained at any time. And agencies may want to consider adding a DPO approval step. That was something in ORPN that was set at the enterprise level. We don't have that set at in Oregon BIS at the enterprise level, and because of the way that approval paths work. If we set that at the enterprise, all of the DPOs would have to be on that one approval path, and that doesn't really work. As agencies are working things, all the DPOs would be getting notifications. So an agency may want to set up a DPO approval step, and then that would be an agency specific approval path. So that's it on the slides, and I will pause for questions.
So this is Kayla, and we've got a question. It is specific, or it has a little bit to do with phase 2, but I think the purpose of this question is really to see what impacts phase 1 will have on phase 2. So I'm going to read the question and we can determine if this is something that you guys want to cover today, or if we want to move this to another time. So when we move to phase 2, the procurement side of the structure will need to match an accounting structure, won't it? Just copying over the current structure in ORPN would not have worked for ODF. And Shannon, did you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I can just say what we've done over the years in ORPN is, you have a program, you're trying to split out a section so they can do their own or whatever it may be. We have a lot of control over what those structures are. And when you're setting up your departments and locations, if I had set up every program in my agency, let's say as a department, then later it would have been difficult to split those out again. You would have had to completely redo the structure based on however the payments are made. And I don't know the answer. I'm just thinking that for us, had I just copied over what we've created over the years, because it wasn't tied to anything, may have potential impacts down the road when the accounting folks start looking at it and saying, who's Salem headquarters? I have no idea, but that's how we identify my shop at Forestry. So that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Got it. And I do think this is appropriate to speak to right now, even though it kind of goes between the two phases. So I'm gonna just kind of speak to it, and then I might let Corey if she has anything to add. So I do know that as we've been working with the agencies, that we have offered the guidance to keep it pretty simple for phase 1, and that it can then be built out further upon phase 2 implementation. So I think that is the way that the majority of the agencies have submitted their templates, is that they are fairly simple and not very extravagantly built out. And so I think that is sort of something that we've been giving guidance all along about, because we don't want folks to have to redo anything. So, there may be some adjustments that folks want to make as we move forward and learn more, but I think for the most part, folks have kept it fairly simple already. But I'm gonna stop and see if Corey has any thoughts there.
The only thing that I'll add, because that is something that we've been sharing in all of, when we talk about these things in the core teams, we do try to make sure that it's clear. But I know that in some cases, those user templates were a little bit daunting for folks. And without seeing it in the system, it's probably difficult to imagine how those render and what that looks like, which is why we are asking folks to look at how it looks in the system as part of that validation that we're asking you to do. But I will add that for the most part, when we're talking about, the structure of the organization, some agencies may in fact have a fairly matched setup with how their organization hierarchy looks just on an org map, for example. In some cases, that may mirror almost exactly. So I don't want to give the impression that there always has to be a different level of complexity or a difference to what you are expecting. It's really going to be on an agency by agency basis. Now, unfortunately, we don't know exactly how your agency manages payments through RStars, or how you're currently managing things like purchase orders, because we haven't worked with you yet on identifying those processes. That's very solidly in our phase 2 work. So when we've asked you to keep it simple, that's really the reason. We don't have all the information to advise on an entire build out. But I assure you that if you've built something out in the system and it turns out that we need to tweak that as part of phase 2, we will have the time and the opportunity to do that as we're working with each of you on those very specific phase 2 processes. So as you're looking at the build out in UAT, if you are concerned about how that looks, if you have concerns because you've gone too detailed and you'd like to back it up, let us know. We can help make those adjustments. We can help make those adjustments in prod. We can work with you to make sure that we are well prepared as we start into our go live and then on to phase 2. So the support is there.
And then so regarding the org structure, is there anything else that we should be thinking about beyond phase 1 that people have already submitted? So maybe they've already submitted it and this has brought up some things for them to consider. One, is there anything specific that they should have been considering, or is there an option if they feel like maybe they didn't understand exactly what they should have submitted? Can they resubmit it? Or should they just contact you if they have questions?
So the submissions at this point are, we're done collecting that information because we're already loading that into the system. So at this point, if you have concerns about how it's set up, if as you're looking at that and you're going through the validations, you're not sure if that's the best path forward, you can let us know. We'll be asking those types of things in the next couple of core team meetings. But of course, if you want to reach out to us, Adam is your point of contact on that. And we can work with you to make sure that you're set up properly. So all adjustments at this point will be done by the OAs in the system. So we can work to support you on that and help make sure that you understand how those adjustments are made. But at this point, they are going to be handled by the OAs.
Thank you, Corey.
So I have a follow-up question. This is Melissa. So we're talking a lot about the OAs, and I'm curious a little bit about this. So the OAs, how are they doing with acclimating to learning the system and carrying out their functions? And B, are they going to be expected to provide assistance to how people need to use the system? Or are they really just here for what you put in this slide about just managing the setups and the changes and that kind of thing? So do agencies need to think about the OA role and whether it's supposed to be just for these things, or would they be using the OA for learning how to use the system or asking questions on how to use the system? So what is your thought in that space?
So I will speak to that somewhat. So the OAs actually do not have access to like documents in the system. They're not going to be like your subject matter expert, which I kind of think is, I think that's what you were asking. So they'll be the folks that can go in and do the actual administrative work to set up a user or to set up a department location or to make adjustments or adjustments to approval paths, but they actually won't be the one to answer questions or provide guidance on how a user uses the system, or if they want to post a bid, what do they do, that type of thing. They wouldn't have any insight into that, and that's one of the reasons why it doesn't, in fact, it shouldn't be somebody in like your procurement or your AP shop for separation of duties. So it really, we've seen a lot of OAs that are maybe in an IT department or an HR department or something like that, where they have a good grasp on who's coming and going within the organization, and that makes more sense for the OA to be in that role. But they don't actually have to have any kind of procurement expertise, because they, again, won't be serving as a subject matter expert to the users.
So is there anything that you could recommend to the agencies as they think about this distinction about the OA's role and how they're going to help their agency navigate the new system? You know, I know that may be a phase 2 question because there's going to be a lot more time to manage that, but even just for phase 1, is there any recommendations that they should be thinking about at this point?
I have seen, I know for Secretary of State and Forestry, I believe both agencies established subject matter experts that were kind of the go-to for those types of questions internally. Periscope will be providing support, but having that internal resource as a subject matter expert, I think, is going to be really helpful. So if an agency wants to establish a SME in-house, that certainly makes sense. Probably one on the procurement side and one on the AP side for phase 2. I don't know, Corey, are there any other recommendations that you can think of at this point?
No, I think that we will be providing a lot of that post-go live support from the project team's perspective too. So we'll continue to have open forums for questions and things like that. So hopefully working through those trainings, continuing to review any guidance documents that we put out, et cetera, because I think that a lot of times those training questions, if we're continuing to get the same questions, then that sort of indicates to me that we might need to update or change our guidance, add more clarifications, et cetera. So any of that kind of stuff, as we're providing that first line of support, we'll be continuing to update those materials as well. So even if that subject matter expert is maybe not using the system quite as much, or if you have somebody who can kind of help guide folks toward that training, et cetera, I think that that's going to be an ongoing help, because those videos, we are creating more videos that will cover other subjects, et cetera. So I think that that's going to be a big help as well.
So Katie, you might want to take some of these questions, and then we can come back to approval paths, but there's a few comments and questions in the chat.
So I think there's some comments here. It's, just a good thing for everybody to be thinking about as we making decisions, and you may want to chat with your accounting folks as we're moving through this. And then thinking about the OA for phase 2 when we're implemented, that maybe the person you have selected for phase 1 is not the right person and it should be somebody else. So be thinking about that. And then OPRD selected their accounting securities person as an OA. I can tell you for ODOT, I'm the OA as the project manager for the implementation, but we will definitely be readjusting that and having someone else who will just do that function. But for me, being the expert in the system is the best role for us, but those are just how we've done it.
So I would ask if there's any questions about organizational structure and setting that up that you folks need to know about or want clarification on. Let's take a moment and think about that for a couple seconds, and please add any questions or feel free to speak up, raise your hand, whatever you wish to do. We want to make sure you have the opportunity to get any clarification you need on the organizational structure.
Okay, Sharon, go ahead.
Thank you. So I think, Nicole, I think you touched on it, but I was writing notes and I didn't catch it all, so my fault. But when you think about a mid-sized agency that's not just located in one building in Salem, but across the state, a statewide program support. What should we realistically expect for that OA person to have as workload? Because people come and go and their roles change and so forth. So it sounds like there could be a need for that change on a fairly regular basis in order to make sure this continues to work. And maybe Shannon, since you're here, maybe since you have like firsthand knowledge of it, maybe you could shed some light on it. We're just trying to get a handle on, we're best to make this setup future, you know, for the future and that realistic view of the workload.
Yeah, this is, excuse me, this is Shannon. I'll add, you know, it hasn't, once the initial setup was done, that was really the big lift. And again, from the accounts payable side, which will be phase 2. So there'll be a lift there, just for setting things up, matching structures, making sure everybody has the right authorities. But you know, it's not a regular thing unless you've got like 75 people coming and going every day. It's fairly simple, you know, to set folks up and give them whatever authorities that you need. Once you have an idea of what you want folks to have, which was one of the comments that I actually just made, because for me, I'm not as familiar with the OA roles and what choices that they can make related to procurement and what it means. For example, you can go in and turn off their ability to submit something like a requisition to DAS. So I think that's where it really is important, is that, you know, I would say get them in how you have them, but there is going to have to be, just like I have to do, a review of what authorities did we really give them when we granted them just standard BP or whatever that might mean. And not just in summary, but in the detail, you can turn off almost everything or turn on things or set dollar values. And so that's really where I'm not sure, because I'm not as familiar as I should be. I'm not sure everybody knows what it really means to set someone up as an OA.
So this is Melissa. In response to that, I'm wondering, Nicole, I'm sure you guys have this, and maybe the DPOs, you know, aren't represented at their core teams, and maybe the core teams already have this, but what kind of, is there a document out there that kind of just explains what the OAs can do in the system that maybe we could just share with the DPOs so that if they choose to look at it, and because I know a lot of them aren't on the core team, or is that too much to ask? At this point, I assume there's a list of what they can do.
Well, so we did organization administrator training, and Corey, do you know, are there like takeaway documents that might be applicable to share with DPOs?
Sure. I mean, we have documents that go through things like how to set up and edit a user, which identifies all of those privileges, which I think is kind of what Shannon is alluding to. So it's things like, can a user submit a requisition regardless of role? So it's those types of things. And we do have a document that we shared with folks, which is just a couple of guidance documents that would be helpful. In addition to that, when we first met with you all and we had some of our kickoff meetings, we shared with you a takeaway about this is really what your OA would be doing. And I think that that's still helpful because it is talking about some of these broad swaths of this is what an OA would do. I think in general, in talking to folks during our core team meetings, what I'm kind of finding is that they've identified someone who will do the ongoing maintenance as an OA, you know, throughout the life of the system. But when we're talking about setup decisions, decisions about approval paths, decisions about custom columns, that really takes some business work too. So someone from the business side, someone who is kind of managing that as either the project coordinator or whomever, it's probably working in concert with that OA individual as far as some of this initial setup. So I know that Nicole kind of mentions that here, once the setup is complete. And that's really, I think, where some of these concerns are. Generally speaking, there are a lot of privileges and things in the system for a user, but those will not come into play really until phase 2. And even then, most users are set up with a pretty standard and straightforward access level. And then, you know, they don't really adjust very often. So I would say that that initial setup is the most crucial time. So there are a few documents, there are a few guides, there are some reference materials that are available on the project website and have been shared with the OAs, and we can continue to share those with the DPOs as well.
Well, I don't want to inundate everybody with paper, but just to stay focused on the request at hand, which is what privileges will the OEA have in the system? If you have a document that just lays that out about what they can do, I think would be a good start. But you also talked about approval paths, which is our next topic. So I just want to, you know, there's probably some questions about approval paths and things we need to think about. So I'm gonna just, I know that this is all part of this section, but I want to make sure that we have a little bit of conversation about approval paths and answer any questions people have about approval paths, what they need to be thinking about now as they're working through this, because many of the DPOs may be in the position, as you just stated, there's business decisions that need to be made about who's going to have approval, who's going to be approving things. So let's open up the floor about that and questions that we might have about that, especially if that's going to be sort of not the OA's responsibility to determine what the approval paths are. They may help open that up or close it down for people in the system, but that's not necessarily, it's not going to be their decision. So do we have any questions about approval paths?
So I have a question about, because I know some departments have their own internal approvals that are outside of procurement approvals. And I was wondering, how are other agencies handling that? Are you actually building that into your own processes, or are you just like, sorry, this is all flat and this is how we're going to do things?
So Shannon, do you want to talk about what you're doing? I know Kayla can talk about what ODOT's doing in this space, just so that we can learn from each other, but also with the benefit of the core team and Periscope to tell us, are we thinking about it right, or do we need to adjust? Do you guys want to share anything in that space? Or I don't know if Sarah is on the phone or Andrew, but do you guys want to talk about that at all?
Sure. I won't say a whole lot about it though, because I know that I know too much in this area. But looking at, you know, for how things are currently in this phase, you know, making it fairly flat and then having some sort of maybe restriction or one approval, as Nicole mentioned, where it goes directly to you know, DPO approval or whatever that may be, so that people aren't just randomly sending things to DAS. You know, that would really be, I think, probably the best way to do it, because you are going to have to build, when you get to the accounting side, you're going to have to build all of the, you know, processes that we used to do on paper. For example, it would come into the office, they'd review it, they'd, you know, initial that we received everything, they'd take it to someone who then does something else and then finally signs it and then sends it into Salem, and that was all done hard copy. So all of those different budgetary, accounting, or, you know, fiscal and procurement authorities are all going to have to be built out in phase 2. So my advice would be to keep it really simple, as long as you have the control you feel you need to limit, again, this is mostly decentralized agencies, to make sure that those decentralized agencies have the ability to limit what people are able to do, and they have some business rules in place for them.
Kayla, do you want to talk about our approval paths conversation, just what we're considering?
Sure. So because for phase one, the impacted area for ODOT is just mainly the procurement office and the folks that actually do the bids and solicitations through ORPN, we have chose to not have any approval paths for phase one. We will continue our approvals the way we do them today. And then as we get into phase two, we'll add in those approval paths. That way we're not holding anything up to get a solicitation out the door, and we'll get those approvals the way we do them today. And then in phase two, we'll add all of our approval paths. And then we do have a comment from Sharon. Since phase one is just requisitions, approval paths have not been a focus. They will be established in phase two, however. It's a concern that what we are establishing in phase one will or could impact that part later. Without context and discussion, this is a concern and may cause rework later. What guidance will help us understand for what we don't know?
So Sharon, just to circle back, so phase one, we're talking about potentially approval paths on your bids, so your solicitations, your notices, your master blanket purchase orders, and I guess it would be potentially on your requisitions that you're sending to DAS on behalf of. So I just want to make sure that we're pointing that piece out. It's not just requisitions. So I know, and I do want to offer, I was looking through the participants. I don't think I saw anybody from Secretary of State, but Corey, maybe you, since you helped with the implementation for SOS, you might be able to speak to it. I know that they put an approval path in place so that they could do like a peer review as they were getting started, just so that they got another set of eyes on things before they actually like sent it out to the public. So that might be another thought too.
So Secretary of State has a very centralized, very controlled setup. And so they want everyone to be using the system. And remember that they are using, you know, the system from nuts to bolts, right? Like they've got everything that they're using right now. They have everyone submitting a requisition regardless of what they're doing in the system. So even, you know, somebody who does nothing with procurement and uses it once a year, they still have to use the system for any sorts of requests. So they have a really robust approval path system. But I think that the advice that Shannon provided, which is really keep it simple for phase one, which is also sort of the advice that we've been sharing with folks in those core team meetings. You may not have any approval paths in phase one. You may choose to continue those approval paths outside of the system for now, and that's perfectly acceptable. That is not unexpected. That is something that works well with how we are migrating into this system. There are some approval paths that would be really helpful. The DPO approval step, for example, anything over $150,000 goes to that DPO for approval, and that's really, you know, what that approval path does. I will say that the adjustment of approval paths, or who is on the approval path, or which documents it applies to, are fairly straightforward changes. So I'm not, I don't see anything that would prevent you from, you know, updating or changing or building upon those approval paths as we move forward. We do have some best practices that we share with folks around making sure that there's space in your numbering to easily add approvers as you go and things like that. So that will continue to be shared. I think that Shannon's advice here is really on point. So thank you for that, Shannon. And, you know, Kayla as well. Some of this, it is also possible to put everything into the system for phase one, but if that feels daunting or, you know, too complex for you to manage right now, you could add an approval path into the production system on August 1st, and we would help support you in that setup. So keep in mind that because this is something that your agency can do at really any point in concert with that OA and whoever needs to make those decisions, we'll continue to support you whenever you decide that those approval paths are important. So just keep that in mind as you digest some of these other pieces of advice from other agencies.
So this is Melissa, just so I can clarify one thing. So what I think I'm hearing is keep it simple for phase one. But keep in mind, especially the DPOs who may be making these decisions about what approvals people will have, think about your process and how might look in phase 2, even though we don't necessarily have all of the information at this point. But keep in mind, start thinking about what are your current approval paths and how that might look if you were interacting with the system in the future. And then who's going to make those decisions in your agency about the approval paths, and then how that's going to be communicated to the OA so they can make the adjustments in the system with, or if they can do it on their own, or if they need the help with PHI. Is that a good summary of what I just heard? Or did I miss it?
I think so.
Yep, I agree.
This is Kayla, and I just wanted to say something about what Nicole had made a comment about approval paths that Secretary of State was using for their peer reviews, especially as we move into the system. One thing that ODOT has considered is using the reminders section in Oregon Buys on those bid and solicitations, potentially for our peer reviews, so that we put those in not necessarily as an approval path, but they could be a reminder in there for a peer review or whatnot. So we're looking at other ways to get that functionality, but maybe not with an approval path.
That's a great idea.
And I have one other clarification. So, lately we've been getting a lot of requests from DAS to, give you guys this information, give you that information. So in phase 2, is there going to be a point where we're supposed to give all this information to you? Or as you said, as we make the decisions, we can adjust the system on the approval paths at a time that works for us when we get to phase 2. And I realize it's a phase 2 question, but I want to make sure that we think about it in phase 1.
I think Jenny actually kind of pointed this out a little bit in the earlier slides when we were talking about what will happen in phase 2. And for each wave, we have a step where we'll be working with each of those agencies in the wave to talk through what their processes are, what the approval paths that they need might be. It'll be a little bit more hands-on when we're talking about some of those phase 2 discussions, because phase 2 has so many more actions in the system. So you will have ample opportunity to work with us to make the best decisions for your agency for phase 2, to work through any adjustments that we need to make for phase 2. So if you have an approval path that you've set up in phase 1, and when we get to phase 2, you question whether or not that still makes sense or needs to be adjusted, we're there to work with you on that. So thinking about phase 2, I know is difficult for folks. This comes up a lot, keep in mind for phase 2, but I know it's difficult without knowing how the system functions in phase 2. But we do have a plan to work with you a little bit more closely for phase 2 to work through your individualized processes, and this would all be included.
Thank you for that clarification. And I know I don't want to spend a lot of time in phase 2, but I do want folks to understand the difference between phase 1 and phase 2, and then what supports we're going to have in phase 2. So we can really focus on phase 1 and how we get our agencies ready for this transition. So I'll turn it back over to Kayla because there's more comments in the field, in the chat.
All right. So a comment here: in your as-is business process, you can identify places where approvals are required, so you can get an idea of where to start. I think that's a great suggestion, especially as we're looking at phase 1 and phase 2. So we're good to not worry about approval pass now then. Great, and thank you. It's from Kat. At OWRD, we realize that our current system includes several lateral approvals, which has led us to hold back on approval pass at this time to allow us to decide which approval stations warrant being included in Oregon Buys approval pass. So it sounds like a lot of folks are kind of holding off for phase 1 to really get a better understanding of what those approval paths should look like for phase 2.
Okay, so that tells me that basically we'll be outside of the system. We'll be doing whatever approval paths we have now based on our business process until there's more discussion in phase 2 about how to work that into the system. All right, is there any more questions about approval paths or user roles or restrictions? Does anybody want to talk about restrictions that maybe we don't know about? I'm not exactly sure how to talk about that, but are there restrictions we need to talk about? Or is that really back to approval paths? Maybe you could help me with that, Nicole.
I'm not sure what that was asking for, to be honest. So I don't know. I'd have to get further clarification on. I mean, if it's just the approval paths or what folks were wanting to know about.
No,
Right.
Melissa,
This
Okay.
is,
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Kayla. I think that this one is really about restrictions on roles and how you could restrict certain roles or authorities within the different DA or basic purchaser and whatnot.
And I think one of the DPOs brought this up, and I can't remember who. So if you remember who brought this up, that would be great. Or if you've already gotten your questions answered, then we're good to move on.
this is
And-
Shannon. I think that what we had, that was part of the organizational administrator discussion, in that if there are things that folks, you know, needed to restrict when they set up users, to if approval paths weren't set up, or, you know, all the options that are available for users, like we had talked about under the organizational structure stuff. So you covered it, I think, from what I'd heard from before.
Perfect. Is there any other questions, comments? This is a great forum and opportunity to get your questions answered. No question is a dumb question. So please, I'll give you a couple seconds to put a chat question in, or raise your hand, or just speak up. And if not, we'll move on to the next topic in just a few seconds. Okay, so we're right on time. We're about a minute over. Yay, we caught back up. Let's talk about active contracts and ORS 190s. And with that, Nicole, or whoever's going to present on this slide from the project team, feel free to give us some context, and we can then go from there with questions and clarifications.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's talk about the QA, or the quality assurance on active contracts. So first of all, we just want to touch on the pre-work that has been done in ORPN. So by updating ORPN, that has absolutely helped with the contract upload template work. It gives us, it facilitates a more complete contract list. Again, also capturing ORS 190s. It allows, by having contracts in that upload template coming that's been populated and will be used for uploading into Oregon buys, that allows for consistent contract numbers between ORPN and Oregon buys, which is a huge benefit. And it also keeps all the relevant data in one place, so that as folks are going through and doing their QA work, they can go back to ORPN and all that information is current and up to date. So we wanted to speak through the QA process. I don't know that folks have really seen a whole lot on that yet. And so we wanted to speak to that, and then we can take questions. So the QA process on an active contract, it's estimated to take anywhere from 10 to 45 minutes, really just depending on the contract complexity, the number of attachments that you would need to move into Oregon buys. So it's really going to vary between there. But what we have done is we've just pulled some screenshots to show you what an uploaded contract looks like. And I'm going to have Corey kind of walk through and just show these are the things that we would be going in and doing the QA work on in Oregon buys. So I'm going to move to the next slide, and then Corey, I'll let you speak to these. Oops, let me go back here. There we
Thanks,
go.
Nicole. So I did want to point out before we even get started that we are putting together a guidance document with step-by-step instructions of the elements that you need to double check and how to do that. So we'll talk about this today, but there will be a follow-up document. We're adding a couple more details to it to make sure that we're on track there. So that will be coming your way. And I think that that is going to be really beneficial as you work through these things. So excuse me. So when you log into Oregon buys and you navigate to the contract that has been loaded, you'll see here at the top that you are that you have the general tab. And so that very first tab to the left is the general tab. And on the general tab, there are some things that you will want to check to make sure that they are complete and accurate, etc. So one thing that you need to check there is the P card enabled checkbox. That is something that you'll want to make sure is set the way that you need it to be set. The recommendation is probably to check this box unless you have a specific need to prevent P cards on this contract. The solicitation enabled checkbox allows you to do a mini bid solicitation or quotes off of this contract. The recommendation is to leave the box unchecked. So there are a few things that you'll want to double check. And again, we'll provide this guidance. The release type will be important. So most of these documents will default to the direct release. So direct release is an automatic creation of a release in PO. This kind of goes to some next phase functionality, but it's important that the contract carries the correct release type. Goodness, I can't talk. So it's important that the contract carries the correct release type. A direct release goes directly to the vendor. A standard release has to be approved by that purchaser before it can go to the vendor. So the recommendation is on a price agreement with goods or commodities that you set the release type to direct release, which is the default. If it's a price agreement with services or a contract with services, then you would set it for a standard release. So that will be an important element there. Okay, Nicole, you want to go to the items tab?
Corey, really, excuse me, really quick before you move on, there was a question. You had talked a little bit about the P card. So the question is, so can a P card payment actually be made through the system in phase 1? Or are you talking about checking it to make sure that it can be used for phase 2?
Checking it to make sure it can be used for phase 2. Because we have loaded these contracts and these contracts will apply, through the life of the contract, some of this setup work requires us to think about that future state. So with the P cards and the release, those are definitely things that we will not be using right away in Oregon buys. But remember that as we're going into phase 2, we will need to have those available, and we wouldn't want to have to go back and do an amendment on a contract to just start using it in phase 2. So that's just a distinction there.
So Corey, this is Kayla. When we're doing the QA on these and we talk about things like that, it sounds like a person who does the QA should be a person who really knows about that contract then, because there are some decisions that need to be made that can impact what happens in the future. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So either the purchaser, the contract administrator, someone who has worked through with that contract in ORPN would be the best person to do the QA work here. Okay, so the items tab. All contracts will be loaded with a placeholder line item. And so if you have additional activities, if you have additional items to add here, if you wanted to be more explicit, you can add additional items here, but you'll want to check to make sure that the line item is at least accurate. You can proceed with just that single line item on the contract. When you're talking about, services or, goods that are somewhat more limited in scope, you may want to have the entire list there. But if it's a very long, price list or something like that, we can talk about how better to set that up. But the single line item should at least be accurate. If you have more to add, you would add them here. I think I saw a question come through.
Yes. So the question is there a deadline for when we need to have the QA complete? When we'll be able to start the QA process? When do you expect to get the guidance documents?
So we are working, we've had some questions around the contract data that we've received. And so we've been working with Adam and some of your agencies to get the updated data. So we're working to upload the contracts this week. Agencies with 50 or more contracts, I believe is the limit that we set, Jenny, will be able to gain early access into the system.
Other agencies will have access to the system beginning on June 23rd to begin that QA process. The goal is to have all of those contracts reviewed by our July 1st go live date.
When is early access?
As soon as we get those contracts loaded, so we're working to load those this week. We'll provide the update to folks, and at that point we'll provide the guidance document.
And then can I ask one more clarifying question in the general tab? And you don't need to go back to the screen, but if you had custom columns, those would need to be completed as well if they're custom columns for your agency. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that is correct. And that's a good note. I'm gonna make a note to myself, so give me 1 second so that I can make sure that we add that.
And then clarifying, did you say they have to be complete by July 1st? And does that include uploading all of the attachments or just the data entry?
It would be all of the pieces. So attachments, confirming the data entry and making sure that it is in sent status with the appropriate vendor by July 1st.
And this is Jenny. I want to talk about a little bit more about that after Corey's gone through all of these steps, if that's okay. We'll come back to those dates if that's all right.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny.
So the next tab that we're going to talk about is, I believe, the vendor tab. The vendor tab is a really crucial and important tab to pay attention to on this document. So if your vendor has not yet been registered in Oregon Buys, if you didn't know the vendor ID, if there was any questions about the data, the default vendor is Periscope. So Periscope Holdings Incorporated, Inc. You need to make sure that this vendor is changed to the appropriate vendor so that we can have this contract complete in the system. We have, we need to make sure that it does not say Periscope Holdings unless you have the contract with Periscope Holdings, I suppose. But the vendor should be correct and accurate. If your vendor is not yet registered in the system, when you go to search for that vendor, you will not find them. And so then we would need to work through getting that vendor registered. Because until that vendor is registered, we do not have a way to link them to a contract in Oregon Buys, and it will remain in progress. So this is a critical tab to pay attention to because there are corrections that will likely need to be made here. And we may need to be working with those vendors to make sure they're registered. I did see a question that is sort of relevant to this, which is who will help get the vendor registered? So we have some vendor registration information that is posted on the project website that you can direct a vendor to. And then there is also a vendor help desk that you can direct them to help them get registered. There's a phone number and an email that we provide. I know we provided in the core team meeting documents, but I think they're likely in a number of other places as well. Nicole might be able to tell you where else that lives, but there are general places that we can direct vendors, and then there is that vendor help desk.
And then Corey, there's another question. Does the registration also need to happen, the vendor registration happen for us to do the QA?
To complete the QA, yes, because you'll have to change the vendor on this tab. So this is part of the QA, is making sure that the vendor is accurate. It is not Periscope Holdings, and that the correct vendor is registered in Oregon Buys and added to the contract.
But the agency could do the other QA steps and then come back and do this last piece before they finish it.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is Melissa. There's a couple other questions about impact if it doesn't get done on time, but I am struggling a bit with this only because I know ODOT is doing a lot of outreach to the vendors, and vendors are still not registering. And this could be a risk if the vendors won't get registered and we need to do the QA to have this all done by July 1st. So just a point I'm making, not anything that you don't even have to respond if we don't know what that's going to look like, but I can tell you we're struggling to get our vendors registered. I know we've had some concerns from other agencies about vendors not getting registered. So, you know, if that's a part of this QA and has to happen by July 1st, I wonder if we have, what are we gonna do if that doesn't work out exactly that way? So
I'll speak to that. Yeah, I'll speak
Okay.
to that, Melissa.
Okay, so, but I do want to understand, I think there were several questions about what happens if we don't make it by July 1st to get all the QA done.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to speak to, but I really wanted people to see what was involved.
Okay,
If you do have the vendors registered, you know who the vendor is, you have the attachments, you know what needs to be done to the contract. That's what Corey's showing. If all the pieces are in play, this is what needs to happen.
Okay, so I'm going to move us to the next tab here, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. So the control tab here. The control tab is where you verify the, well, there are options here for things like cooperative purchasing, but within agency contracts, that's probably a little less likely. But the control tab also has information about the start and end date of the contract. And so it's important to just double check this here to make sure that the correct start and end date's loaded with that contract upload, particularly the expiration date. I think in some cases, an expiration date may need to be looked at if it was incorrect in that template. So please double check these dates because of course, that is what makes them available in the system if they are active. So then the next tab here is the attachments tab, which is the fun tab that we have been talking about through a lot of other avenues here. So the attachments are not, you know, we didn't upload any attachments. It will be up to you to determine what should be attached to the contract. We have given some guidance that current information should be attached here, but if information is just historical, it can probably live in ORPN because it is still searchable there. So I would advise folks to focus on what is currently necessary on the contract for attachments. When you do an upload of an attachment, this is all pretty standard functionality. I mean, this is similar to how you add an attachment in an email. You search for the file, you load that file, and you continue to do that until you are done adding those attachments. Each needs to be added separately, but you can add as many as you would like. And there is no size constraint. The only constraint here might be you know, your internet speed. If you're at home and things are running a little bit slower, it might take a little longer to load the attachment. So keep that in mind. The other piece here is that you do not have the ability to load an executable file, which is fairly standard, or an email. So if you have an email that you need to attach for any sort of reference purposes, you would need to save it off in another document and then add that as a Word document or a notebook document or something of that nature. So emails and executable files are not able to be uploaded. Otherwise, all other types can be uploaded here.
Corey, can you drag and drop, or do you have to do the add file and save?
You have to do add file and save.
And remember that, like when DHS does their MMIS contract that has 47 amendments, that the 46 of them are still in ORPN with read-only, with they're available. So you really only have to attach those that are relevant. And we've been doing this work for statewide price agreements, and you know, ones that have been around for a long time, we don't need to move everything. The system does remember a folder you're working in. So if you've got file folders for contracts, that goes pretty quickly, actually. I've done some of this work.
Great. The process itself is straightforward. I think it's, you know, making that determination of what should be uploaded and just kind of working through that. But the process will be very, you know, familiar to you because it is very similar to a lot of other softwares on that front. So on each of these pages where you are adding information, you need to make sure that you are using either save and exit or save and continue. And Nicole, did you want to back up just a second there on that last screenshot? No, none of these screenshots have it. That's okay. At the bottom of every page, there is a save and exit or a save and continue. Save and continue keeps you, you know, on the same page that you're currently on. So that's my recommendation, just so you can keep track. Make sure that you select that on every tab. And my recommendation is select that even if you didn't make any changes, because then you can just be doubly sure that you've done all of that work. If something is not saved on a page, you will lose it, even if you're working on other tabs. So each tab has its own save and continue button. So keep that in mind, just as a reminder there.
Thanks, Corey. We cropped off some of the bottom just to make this readable, so it wasn't too small.
Of course, yeah. So then what you are going to do is you're going to move to the final tab, which is called the summary tab. And on the summary tab, it is, of course, just going to give you a summary of all the information. And then at the bottom of the page, you see these buttons here that Nicole is showing you. And so the submit for approval is going to be the button that you use to move this forward. So canceling the PO will obviously render it, you know, canceled. You won't be able to use it anymore. Cloning a PO would be if you needed to, you know, create this exact contract a second time. Perhaps something is completely, you need to make that decision. We would probably work with you on that decision. So I wouldn't expect you to be needing either cancel or clone at this point. Print and print vendor copy are not, the functionality there is pretty limited. So what we're asking you to do is submit for approval. And when you submit for approval, Nicole, I don't know if you have another screenshot or if this is the last one you have.
This is the last one.
Okay, so when you submit for approval, since we're talking about these approval paths, if you do not have an approval path in place, you can either add an approver. So if you want somebody to double check your work, you can just add someone there, or you can select automatic approval and it will continue its path forward. So the final action that you will take is a save and continue action, and you'll be ready to send it to the vendor. At the very bottom of the screen, you'll have an option to send and notify the vendor, and that will allow us to communicate to the vendor that the contract is in Oregon Buys. So that final status that you'll see is Ascent Status, which is why we keep referring to that Ascent Status. It is going to indicate to you that you have completed all of the steps in the QA process there. So that is the status that you'll be looking for. In the guidance documents that we'll be sharing with you, we have step-by-step instructions. We also have some screenshots with plenty of arrows pointing out the relevant information. And we have a spreadsheet that you'll be able to use to track your progress on those documents. So we'll be providing all of that information with the updates that we'll be completing, and that will come to you when we have those contracts ready for you to QA.
Okay, Corey, there's one more question I want to ask. Before I get to that, I have a quick question. When we talk about the QA, what are people supposed to be QAing this against? Are they QAing it against ORPN? Are they QAing it against the actual contract document? Is there guidance on what they're actually QAing, or is it really up to the agency?
I would say that it would be up to the agency. It may also be just the contract administrator's knowledge of the contract. So the pieces that we're asking you to confirm, which are things like the start and the expiration date, the vendor themselves, any attachments, that may all just be something that the contract administrator knows and doesn't necessarily have to compare it to a document. So rather than a comparison, it's mostly to QA the upload itself, make sure everything uploaded properly, that you've updated anything that needs updating like the vendor, and that you've confirmed any of those additional pieces.
All right. And I know Jenny's going to talk a little bit about the timing and all of that, but the one other question here, is there a reason we can't refer to ORPN as a system of record for attachments so agencies can work on adding those documents later? I'm thinking that way they are in sent status by July 1st, but if there isn't time to add all of the attachments, at that time you could go back and complete it later.
So when we load the contracts, we are loading them in an in-progress status, which means you can navigate through any of the tabs and you can make whatever changes are necessary. So you can easily go in and add attachments, you can update the vendor, you can do a number of things on this contract as if it was being created for the first time. The reason that we load it in that in-progress status is that it makes it much easier to make changes. Once you move it to sent status, any changes, including adding an attachment, will need to be done via an amendment. And an amendment, you know, that is significantly harder than adding the attachments to an in-progress document. So that is a piece of it. As far as the policy decision, I can let Jenny and Nicole speak to that. But I do see one more question here, which is around who will it submit to? And it submits to the vendor that you have listed on the contract, which is why it's so crucial to make sure that that vendor is correct, because that's who will receive it.
And then Corey, there's one more question. Is there a term sheet for Oregon Buy's terms, like example, like what sent status means complete, what the different statuses mean?
Lisa,
Yeah.
I'll take that.
Okay.
I know this feels like something we've been promising, and we get it, and then we add something to it, and then we change. And I just was messaging with Amy, and we're going to have a copy out on Tuesday of what we have. We promise. We were going to do it Friday, but it's Friday before holiday, so a lot of people aren't working. So that's been on the ask from a lot of people, and we will get a first draft out. And if you all see things, actually sent status is one of the things on them, in progress and what that means, and sent what it means. So if once you get it, you still have ones you want on there, please let us know.
And then one more comment, if you are entering existing contracts from ORPN, why would they submit to the vendor? Won't this cause confusion?
Because it is a contract in the new system, the only way that we have to confirm with the vendor that it's in Oregon Buys is to submit. And we don't have a way to move it to that final status, you know, without notifying the vendor or making sure that they are aware that it is now in Oregon Buys. So that's probably a communication piece. I think that Ginny or Nicole can probably speak to that as well. But systematically, that is the final step of a process if you were submitting a contract. And we are uploading the contract documents, but we still rely on the system functionality for those steps.
So, and again, so because folks are using this contract upload template, we are able to retain the same contract numbers as we had in ORPN versus a brand new master blanket purchase order that's created in Oregon Buys for a contract would have a system generated number. So I think that's a great thing. As the vendors see that, that's going to be a contract number that they're used to. But I will ask Jenny, do you know, have we done any kind of additional outreach on the DAS procurement side as we've been doing that contract QA, or has there been any issues with confusion from the vendor on that?
Not that I know of. There hasn't been any confusion, and we didn't do anything additional, but we certainly sent a lot of emails about getting registered that a new system is coming. So just hope that's what they were seeing.
Sharon, did you have a question?
Can I just interrupt for a sec because of time? Can we come back to some of these questions, because we still need to talk about 190 agreements, and we're at almost at our time for this subject matter. We do have 20 minutes. We'll come back to this, but I'd like to give Jenny some opportunity to talk about the impacts if we don't get it in, and some of the things you were going to come back and talk about.
Yeah.
And we can come back to the questions if after we do 190s, because we do need to discuss 190s, and that's probably going to take up a lot of the rest of our time. But I want to finish out this conversation. We'll come back to the questions at the end when we have time. And if we don't have time, we'll take them and send them out to the Organ Buys team, and then they can choose to answer you guys directly, or maybe we can talk about it at the next meeting or whatever, but we'll figure that out. But I want to make sure we get through all the agenda items. So why don't you go ahead and talk, don't move to Organ Buy ORS 190s yet. Do you want to talk about the impacts, Jenny?
Yeah, yeah. And so I wanted everybody to see the QA, and that the 10 minutes to 45 minutes. I keep saying I did a lot of statewide price agreements just so I would have some experience in this, and I did it from a report. So it wasn't, you do have to understand, somebody's got to do the work that does know what attachments mean and what the selection criteria, but a lot of it becomes rote for similar agreements. And so the instructions are quite good for this. They are being updated because there's some things specific to statewide agreements that aren't specific to agency. So that was very helpful for going through this process. We recognize that because of the we're 2 weeks late in getting the access to go in and QA for those that wanted it early. That's a function really of getting the users and the departments, which was first step in all of the contracts. So we've caused a delay. I talked to Debbie Dennis this morning because I feel this angst just building about the workload and the time. And we recognize that there are going to be ones that the supplier is not registered, and maybe they're not registered because they know I'm going to finish out this contract and I'm never doing business with Oregon, or whatever the reason may be. So there may be some that never do register. There may be some that haven't registered, and on July 10th, when they want an amendment done to their agreement, they're going to have to register. There's going to be a compelling reason, and at that point, they are going to have to register, because you are going to have to get the agreement in Ascent Status in order to do an amendment on it. In talking with Debbie, the risk of not having a deadline is just the risk that the work never gets done. And in the life that we all lead, there is always something, always. And so, and when Jan and I talked about this last week, there's no punishment for them not being in the system, but there is an expectation from the governor's office that we use this system. And so what we came up with is granting a 60-day grace period, but we're going to run a report every month so that everybody knows where they are. We'll provide it to DPO and to steering committee of how many are still in progress. And specifically, we can pull those that still have Periscope listed as a vendor, which means the supplier is not registered yet. So we're going to start with that, and hopefully that July and August timeframe, along with please go ahead and get started, whether it's next week for those with 50 or more contracts, or the 23rd for those with much less. The sooner you get in and get in a groove on it, the better it will be. I refer back in saying that, and in looking at Kelly's comment about what is already in ORPN, that is another very important reason that all of that information is over in ORPN now that we're down to crunch time, and there's concern about having the ability to move things. So that is what I wanted to share, that we will do a 60-day grace period, but reporting each month on where we stand, so that so that we continue to move forward, that it doesn't fall away, because as we'll see in a minute, for those with ORS 190s, there's a whole lot of those to do, and those are due by the end of the year. Or we said we'll do as many as we can and then do a check on those. So is that helpful? Does that give anybody a little bit of breathing room?
Does anybody want to use a thumbs up or say anything? I mean, I'm certainly happy about it. I think I still need to push because, again, we're going to be using the system and we're going to need the information in there. So I think it's going to be a both and. It's going to be put the stuff in when you need to take an action, and you may have to do it then, or you may have to, and keep pushing to get them in when you can. I can tell you that you could consider putting aside, time during the week that people get, 2 or 3 hours and that's all they do. There's other ways to get it done so there's more focused time for them to get them in. Certainly ODOT's a big agency, so we have a lot to put in, but I do appreciate the consideration, Jenny, on sending this out. And it looks like other people are thanking you as well.
And it's, well, certainly, and it's not me. I mean, DAS PS is in the same boat with all of the agency specific contracts, I know, but we just got, I appreciate that, Melissa. We've got to keep pushing that the work still has to get done, and who knows what July will bring. So,
and this is Nicole. I just wanted to echo on something that Jenny touched on, but I think I'm going to ask Jenny to kind of speak maybe a little bit more to it. But if there is a new contract put into place, or if one of the existing contracts is amended so that the version that's in ORPN is no longer active, I would think that those contracts that are sitting in progress would need to be then moved to Ascent Status in Oregon BICE so that we can capture that.
Absolutely. Because ORPN, nothing new can be done in ORPN. So you will, any new solicitations and amendments, that would be your first order of business.
So Sharon, I think, had a question. I know I'm trying to help Michaela too, to monitor both the chat and the hand raised.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll keep it brief. Again, Jenny, thank you. And I know it was a move to get this for everybody, but just so I'm clear on this, so the 60-day, we're still going to shoot for the first, of course, but any that we can't go across that finish line, and most likely it'll be because of the vendors, the 60-day will keep us from having, then once we get them there, having to amend this contract to be able to put these, to correct these things later. Is that what the 60-day will do, is hold off on the requirement to have to amend it after the first?
It will say that you will have a big list of in progress contracts that moved over with a ORPN number attached to them. They'll stay in progress. The goal was to have everything in Ascent Status that could be finalized. But we're saying now you have an additional up to 60 days to get all of those that were uploaded completed.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so if it's okay, I want to go ahead and move to ORS 190s because we probably will have a full and rich discussion on that as well, just to keep us moving. And if we have any time, we will at the end. But we can still use the chat feature for additional questions, and we will certainly take a look at those if we don't get to questions today again and see how we might answer them.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So one slide here on ORS 190s, and I think folks have seen something similar already once before, but we offered guidance to include the ORS 190s in the contract upload template. And again, one of the big reasons for that is when you move them over in that upload template, you can keep that ORPN number. So ORPN has the active version of the ORS 190 that can be used for searching and reporting, but you can leave your ORS 190 in progress for Oregon buys for now. If that ORS 190 is revised or amended, then the agency would need to complete the in progress draft, and it's sort of similar to that QA process that Corey just walked us through. They would need to finish that process immediately for that ORS 190, including the revision information or revision amendment information, and move it to Ascent Status. That way we have a current version, a live version of the ORS 190. Any new ORS 190s that are issued after the agency has submitted that contract upload template needs to be entered manually in Oregon buys after go live. And this sort of ties in, I think, with a question I see in chat from Kathleen about what happens if a contract isn't uploaded and put in manually. You can still fill in all of the same fields that you won't have some of the fields pre-populated, but the other big one is that you will be assigned an auto-generated number in Oregon buys. It won't be pulling from what you had in ORPN. And then as far as ORS 190 completion, agencies can work on completing those draft ORS 190s in Oregon buys through the end of the year. That's our goal. And then we're going to be pulling reports to look and see where we're at with that. I know that there are some agencies that have a large number of those. So I think, again, I think this is guidance we've talked about before. If there's anything else or questions that folks want to know about on ORS 190s, we can certainly address those.
Thanks for your help, Corey.
All right, so do we have any questions about ORS 190s that we need to talk about today? Or questions about this? So my understanding, what I think I heard you say and what Jenny has said before is we will need to go in and address 190s, but we'll have to the end of the year to do that. And then you'll run a report to kind of let us know where we are and what more we have to do. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that is correct. And it doesn't speak to it, I don't think, on this slide, but just to bring up again for folks, you will have to have the other entity in the ORS 190 have a vendor registration completed for them so that you can tie that agreement to them. They would be serving as a vendor for those. And so this gives additional time for that other entity to create a vendor registration if they haven't already. So that'll be something too that you'll kind of work through during that QA process. I will say though that there are a lot of state agencies and local governments that have already created a vendor registration. Secretary of State put all of their ORS 190s in the system and did a lot of outreach to get vendors or to get agencies to create those vendor registrations. So there's a good chance some of those might already be in the system.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, and I want to make sure I got it and it makes sense, is you guys are you're gonna transfer over the 190s that we currently have in the system. They'll be in progress status. We'll have till December to kind of plan for going in and getting them into, I guess, Ascent Status. Sorry if I'm not using the right terminology, but and so we're going to be able to see the 190s, but we may, but we'll need to make time to do that, to go in and get them into Ascent Status at some point in that 6 months. So it's not something that's pressing right now. But we should be able to find the 190s in Oregon buys in their current state.
Yes, so I would say all of that is correct with one little clarification. That is only if the agencies have included them in their contract upload template. If they have not included them in their contract upload template, they would have to be built manually.
Kayla, you have a question.
Yes, I see that. So how do we ensure that we do not have duplications on the ORS 190s? Yes, I am aware that in the actual ORS 190 states who is responsible to enter ORPN or now Oregon buys.
I get the question. I'm not sure that I have a sophisticated way to answer or to check. Let me make sure I'm understanding the question, Julie. So basically you're saying if your agency had an ORS 190 with DAS, for example, how would you make sure that DAS hasn't already entered it and you enter it? The nice thing is for these that are coming in on the contract upload template, it has to be a unique document number. So if both of them are trying to put them in using the same existing contract number, we're going to know about that. And so I think that's one way, definitely, that we'd be looking for duplications. But if it's something that is built new and it's an auto-generated number in the system, I don't know that there is a sophisticated automated way, I guess, to check for it. I can certainly ask. I know Corey's had to drop off to go pick up her daughter, but we can certainly ask Periscope if they have any ideas.
Well, that's good for all of the DPOs to know that there could be duplication, and maybe for entering the number in it, I assume the system will somehow tell us this is already in there. That might be a way to help, but that's good information for us to know and be aware of about the possibility of duplications. I personally didn't think about that, but that is something for us to be aware of. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no different than we have in ORPN today. I mean, so if DAS was in an ORS 190 with ODOT, ODOT may have reported it and DAS may have reported it. So it's the same situation. I do think using those contract upload templates, though, is a great way to watch for that, because it would error out if it's trying to upload with the same number.
Okay.
And we had given the guidance that if ORS 190s were one and done agreements, don't bring them over. But if it's an annual renewal or an agreement that gets amended, they should be moved over.
There's another question here. Is there a custom field for each agency to input in their numbers? And can we sort by that?
So I'll take that one. That's very timely. We actually talked about this at the Oregon BIS Advisory Council meeting yesterday, and it's come up in multiple core team meetings. So Lisa, I assume what you're asking about is like if you had an agency kind of internal tracking number or something specific, if there's a way to input that number somewhere and then be able to sort by it. Is that what you're asking? Okay, I'm gonna assume that is. I won't see a response. Yes. Okay. So the guidance is there's not like an enterprise level custom column. The guidance would be that the agency could put that number in the short description field if they wanted to, which is kind of like the title field for ORPN. So you could include that there. That would be searchable. The other thing that you could do is to put in an agency specific custom column if you wanted to do something where you made it like a required field. So you could choose to do that, and to kind of circle back, your organization administrator can set up that custom column for you.
Okay, so I'm hearing that there's not going to be a special custom column, but people could put their numbers into their description field if they want to keep track of the numbers.
Right. And really that's only if there's a number that is different from the document number that's assigned in Oregon BIS. So if you have used that contract upload template, the document number for that ORS 190 is going to be whatever it is in ORPN. So you shouldn't have to put it somewhere else. And just by when Periscope is doing the upload of those templates, the system will error out if there are duplicates. So it's going to be looking for that. It's more if you are doing manual entry and you want a place to put it, you could put it in the short description field.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Because we are rounding out the rest of our meeting. It's almost 3:25. Is there any other questions about ORS 190s that we need to address?
There is a comment here about it would be helpful to show duplicate ORS 190s. I'm not sure where. Maybe Lisa, you could talk to that.
Sorry, I just meant it as a follow-up comment about you know, if we had the custom field for each agency, then if we put each agency with their number and you can sort by, okay, so there's like duplicate numbers because DEQ has our own number and, you know, OJ has their number.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, it's about 3:25, almost. Why don't you go ahead and finish out your slides, Nicole, and then we can just do a quick wrap up.
Yep.
I know there's more things we might want to talk about. We're out of time today. But again, you could send things to the DPO chat later if you think of things. Also, please pass on your questions to your core team representatives so that they can bring it back to the core team and then loop back around with you if you're not on the core team. I find that has been helpful. So why don't you wrap up, Nicole, and then we'll close out the meeting.
Sure. So just one final thing here is that we wanted to share some different resources and where you can get assistance. So the project website is oregonbuys.oregon.gov. We also have that drive on Workday, and Adam walked us through looking at that in a previous meeting. We have office hours with Periscope. Those are Q&A drop-in sessions. They're every Tuesday and Thursday through June 29th, and those are available through Zoom meetings. The session times and the login credentials for those are posted on that Workday drive. And then please contact your agency core team, project coordinator, or core team members. Like Melissa was saying, you can route anything through those groups as well. So with that, we are just to general Q&A.
Okay, there's a couple questions in here. The first one is, when will these slides be sent out?
I will make sure we get a copy over to Kim Wisdom after the meeting.
All right, and the next question is regarding GASB 87. What functionality reporting out of Oregon buys exist to assist with implementation of GASB 87?
This is Jenny, and there's not any in phase one since we're not issuing purchase orders. We're not doing any buying off of through the system. Right now, there's not anything specific. There's discussion as part of phase two of how to loop. There's quite a few federal things that some agencies have pointed out, but currently there's not anything at organized.
Okay, so I appreciate everybody's time. We have one more question we can get to, but then I want to make sure I have just a bit of time to close out the meeting to just give you some follow-up instructions, and then we'll be able to close out. So Sharon, let's go ahead and see if we can answer your question, and then we can end our question and answer session, and then I'm going to need to just wrap up the meeting.
The question is, will lease agreements need to go into Oregon buys in the future?
So lease agreements that are part of a procurement will be in Oregon buys.
Okay. That's pretty straightforward. Thank you. All right, so I want you folks to know that we captured all the attendees today. We also captured all the questions today, and we're going to pass all the questions on to Des. Most of these have been answered, but we want to just keep it in front of us in case we need to, come back around any further clarifications. I think it just always helps to keep these in mind. I really appreciate everybody's participation today. Thank you so much, Jas, for coming. I know you guys have a lot on your plate right now, and you're trying to get us over the finish line. And, I know the agencies really want this to be successful. So we need to continue the open communication. So thank you so much for everybody's time today. And please pass on my thanks to the Periscope team as well. And I look forward to more discussions. We have another meeting in June. We'll be much further along at that point, but please do keep up open lines of communication with your core team members if you're not in those core teams, so that those discussions are making their way back, and then you're following up to make sure you're getting answers you need, because that's really the best way to do this. But I really liked the discussion today, and I just really appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.